Ndị be anyị ekenenu m unu ọzọ n'ụbọchị nke taata. Dịka unu si na-esoro anyị na-eme na Eastern News 24, unu na n'iru akwụkwọ unu ya afọ Maazị Nnamdi Kanu, onye ndu, unu ya afụkwa late Chief Odumegwu Ojukwu, ihe afụkwa Biafran Prime Minister Maazị Simon Ekpa, na ihe afụkwa Peter Obi, ndị aka wetara n'iru akwụkwọ. O nwere mere anyị ji weta iru na ya bụ ihe ka anyị kpọghachite n'uche ndị ụmụnne anyị gbasịta maka ihe na-eme nkịta n'obodo a, ana gbasịta maka o si wee kwụrụ. O nwere ife kpatara na ife ji eme, ana ọ bụ na ife akpatara na ife ji eme, ọ bụ na na-eri ya anya ihe a na-eme na ama nkwụsị. Na bifo nga n'elu, a sị m unu darịrị n'ịmụ Chukwu ka unu si na-esoro anyị. Cheta na ihe a bụ Eastern News 24 ka anyị si wee wetara nnukwu ozi ya dị oke mkpa, nke na ya bụ ife anyị na-eji tinye n'iru akwụkwọ gbasịta maka ihe kpataranụ o ji dịka ndị zuu ehetiri ụmụ Chukwu, ehetiri ụmụ Biafra. Nke na ya bụ ife unu ga-esi ya, unu adrọpụrụ anyị kọmentị unu on the comment section below. All right, over to you, sir.
We all know about the story about Afonja, but there was somebody else who played similar role to Afonja in 1966, and to be more specific, on July the 29th, 1966. That man is T.Y. Danjuma. We shall look at his role, see what he did, his actions and inactions. And towards the end, we shall also look at the perspective from the IVO lens, because sometimes it is good to look, from the inner core. Those who knew Agui Ronsi, I did the research to check on this, and his son gave a very good interview, and I have the interview about what happened that day, that fateful day, July the 29th, 1966, in I believe it's in Ibadan, the Yoruba land of Oyo State. That was where Aguiyi met his untimely demise. So if you're ready, I want you to come to this journey. Appreciate my scholarship, and let me take you on a journey. Firstly, my fellow Biafrans, we should look at what happened in ABURI between Gowon, the one they call Jack, and our leader, eternal leader, Ojukwu. Listen to a brief discussion, then I'll come back. Just listen.
1967, delegates and representatives from both the federal government of Nigeria and the eastern region, led by Lieutenant Colonel Emeka Ojukwu, met in Aburi, Ghana, to agree on what is now known as the Aburi Accord. The meeting at Aburi was supposed to be the last opportunity to avoid any conflict or civil war. Unfortunately, it was not to be. The first military coup that installed Major General Johnson Thomas Agui Ironsi as Nigeria's first military head of state on January 16, 1966, the northern soldiers had started planning, by May 1966, the revenge of their leaders who had been murdered in January. The northerners were the major casualties of that coup that was carried out by soldiers mainly from the east. To them, it was an eastern favored coup, as Aguiyi Ironsi's regime was believed to be extremely partisan. This highlighted the feeling of insecurity of other groups. It created more problems than it solved old ones, which led to severe criticism of the Supreme Commander. Out in the east, but even more so in the north after August 1st, 1966. The mass killings of the Igbo in the north were a deplorable act that was condemned by Nigerians, including the military governors. A different turn. It was accentuated even more by the fact that the Eastern Regional Government in Enugu immediately threatened secession if certain grievances and demands were not met in 1966, and the subsequent killing that followed in May and September. Further, Ojukwu said that his region was perturbed, that contrary to Gowon's promise on August 9, 1966, that all soldiers would return to their region of origin, northern troops still occupied the western region. Gowon replied that his promise of August 9 applied to the repatriation of soldiers of northern origin stationed in the east back to the north, and those of eastern origin stationed in the north back to the east. He had fulfilled his promise, he said. He then emphasized that soldiers of northern origin would remain in the west since there were only a few Yoruba in the Nigerian army. Ojukwu was not satisfied and further insisted on a reorganization of the army on a regional basis. Gowon was also firmly opposed to splitting up the army. Ojukwu claimed that Nigeria did not have a central government since the country, as a result of the second coup and its aftermath, resolved itself into three separate sovereign areas: the Lagos West-North area, the Midwest area, and the East area. But Gowon insisted that Nigeria was still one nation, an entity composed of 4 regions and a central government in Lagos. The Lagos West-North area, the Midwest area, and the East area. But Gowon insisted that Nigeria was still one nation, an entity composed of 4 regions and a central government in Lagos. Ojukwu then proposed that the situation in the nation necessitated a drawing apart of the regions because the separation of forces, the separation of the population is, in all sincerity, necessary in order to avoid further friction and further killings. The other leaders, who all wanted one Nigeria, agreed to Ojukwu's proposal, but apparently without understanding the implication. This was a bombshell of ABURI.
There you have it, my BIAFRA people. There you have it. Our eternal leader Ojukwu asked Gowon to move all the military from the west and from the east, the northern military to be more specific. He asked for the northern military to be moved back to the north so that the west and the eastern side of Nigeria would have their independence, and from there there will be mutual respect. He also asked for the body of Aguiyi-Ironsi that was buried in Ibadan to be exhumed and brought back to Enugu. And I can assure you that that was the only agreement that was fulfilled. So for those saying that Ojukwu was the problem, there was already an agreement that was reached in ABURI Accord when Ojukwu and Gowon went all the way to Ghana to have that discussion. These agreements were signed on the dotted lines and it was agreed by both parties or all parties involved. And Ojukwu has already started implementing those agreements, one of which to go all the way to Ibadan and to exhume the body of Aguiyi-Ironsi, which he brought back to Enugu for burial. You all saw the video of the burial. And the woman dressed in black was the wife of Aguiyi-Ironsi. So do not assume or do not mistake or don't come with any weak argument that Ojukwu was the problem of Nigeria. When Britain made Nigeria to be one, Ojukwu, being a respectful man, a man of his word, he went all the way to ABURI to have a discussion with Gowon, with the belief that he was having a discussion with a friend, somebody he is known very closely, someone he is fond of calling Jack. That was his nickname. What's so funny is even the family of the late Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, even his family, his son, they call Gowon Uncle Jack. From my research, I was able to find out that even Gowon knew the family or was a friend to Aguiyi-Ironsi. So sometimes it beats my imagination. I want us to go towards the deaths. Let us visit the deaths of Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi. And let us see the role that T.Y. Danjuma played. On that day, what really happened? I believed it was a Sunday. What really happened in the home of Adekunle Fajri, because from our research, ABURI was going around trying to make peace. He was discussing with all the stakeholders. He went to the north and he had a discussion with them because they were angry about the coup that was led by Chukwuma Kaduna Nziogu, a man from Delta State, which happened on the 15th of January 1966. The Northerners, they were very angry that people were killed. Some prominent Northerners were killed. And the so-called coup plotters, they were in jail. They have not been killed, or they've not been court-martialed, according to the Northerners. So they wanted ABURI to come down and have a discussion with them to know the way forward. So this was what ABURI was doing when he was going around the different, segments of the country or sections of the country. He was at the north, he discussed with the emir, he discussed with the stakeholders in the north. And he came towards the west or the south side of the Yorubas, where he also met with his friend, his bosom friend, Adekunle Fajri. So my fellow Biafrans, sometimes we need to revisit history and see what really happened on that day. What was the role of T.Y. Danjuma, a man who now is very, very rich? He was blessed, given wealth by the Fulani Caliphate. Last time I checked, he is now an owner of oil wells. T.Y. Danjuma, who carried out an act, a murderous act, was rewarded by the Zoo government. He is now a multi-billionaire, an owner of the oil well from the land of Biafra. And he did what he did on the 29th of July 1966 in a bid to please the Caliphate, the Fulani Caliphate. So let us listen to what happened on that day from a third person's perspective, because sometimes when I speak, people might say, oh, he's being biased because he's a Biafran. Let us hear from a journalist what they said happened on that day. A very well detailed analysis of the account that happened that day. Listen.
A moment later, they got to Ironsi, who shouted, quote, "Young man." And Danjuma responded, "Sir, you are under arrest." Ironsi then asked, "What is the matter?" Following a brief discussion with Lieutenant Ibrahim Bako and Lieutenant Abdullahi Sheleng, a short phone call to Lieutenant Colonel Moritala Mohammed in Lagos was made, since Mohammed had previously asked the boys to stand down from their pre-planned coup. Danjuma, Dada, Bako, Sheleng, and the duty officer James Onoja opted to ignore Mohammed and proceed with operations in Ibadan. Major Danjuma was accompanied to the government house in the early hours of July 29, 1966 by 24 soldiers under Lieutenant James Onoja. The main goal was to isolate the premises, cut the supreme commander up from the chain of command, and arrest him as a bargaining tool in the case of the boys who killed Okunweze and others in Abeokuta. Danjuma was under pressure from the boys on the ground to continue the operation once the building was surrounded, but Danjuma stood firm against the pressure. Lieutenant Sani Bello, who was Ironsi's Army ADC, emerged from the building at 6:30 a.m. to find out what was going on. He was arrested and told to remove his shoes and sit down on the ground. Members of the head of state's motorcade and delegation were also halted and asked to sit down on the ground as they arrived from their guest chalets. Lieutenant Colonel Fajri personally emerged from the building at this point. After a brief confrontation with T.Y. Danjuma, which indicates that the boys were there for his boss, he was led back into the building to meet Ironsi. At this point, Danjuma was brandishing a hand grenade to commit suicide should there be any attempt by Fajri or Ironsi to fight back. A moment later, they got to Ironsi, who shouted, quote, "Young man." And Danjuma responded, "Sir, you are under arrest." Ironsi then asked, "What is the matter?" In his response, Danjuma replied,
The matter is you, sir. You told us in January, when we supported you to quell the mutiny, that all the dissident elements that took part in the mutiny will be court-martialed. It is July now. You have done nothing. You kept these boys in prison, and the rumors are now that they will be released because they are national heroes.
Ironsi, who was visibly surprised, said,
Look, what do you mean? It is not true.
At this point, Ironsi and Danjuma began arguing, with Fajuyi getting in between them and reminding Danjuma again and again of his promise that no harm would come to Ironsi. Danjuma interjected,
Fajuyi, get out of my way. You, just calm down.
Danjuma said to Ironsi,
You organized the killing of our brother officers in January, and you have done nothing to bring the so-called dissident element to justice, because you were part and parcel of the whole thing.
But Ironsi argued,
Who told you that? You know it is not true.
Danjuma then said,
You are lying. You have been fooling us. I ran around, risking my neck, trying to calm the ranks, and in February, you told us that they would be tried. This is July, and nothing has been done. You will answer for your actions.
At this point, Danjuma and Lieutenant Andrew Nwankwo, Ironsi's Air Force ADC, had a fierce verbal exchange, with one holding a grenade with a pin pulled and the other holding a pistol. But with the fingers of 5 other soldiers on the triggers of automatic weapons, Nwankwo was outgone. When the group got downstairs, Danjuma instructed the adjutant of the 4th Battalion, Lieutenant Garba Dada Paiko, to take the pair to the guest house at Mokwa, pending death or full inquiry. But Dada was not committed to the commitment of safety for the two. After a fierce confrontation between them, Fajuyi turned to Danjuma and said,
You gave us the assurance.
Danjuma replied,
Yes, sir. I am sure you will be alright.
But he was wrong. He had lost control of the situation already. Both Ironsi and Fajuyi were squeezed into a front seat of one vehicle and taken away. They drove to Mile 8 on Iwo Road, where the group dismounted and went into the bush, crossing a small stream. Ironsi and Fajuyi were subjected to beatings and interrogation. It has been reported that Ironsi was shot by an angry northern officer because he refused to respond to questions and confess his role in the January coup. Sources say this officer was Sergeant Chijani. Fajuyi was not spared either. He was also shot. Although the Western Region publication Fajuyi the Great, published by the Ministry of Information in 1967 after his official burial, said he had offered to die rather than abandon his guest. Those involved in his arrest and assassination insist that he was an even more critical target than Ironsi. Please like this.
There you have it, my fellow BIAFRANs and people around the world. This was how General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi met his untimely demise in the hands of T.Y. Danjuma. And also, towards the end of this narrative, the presenter did say, perhaps, Adekunle Fajuyi was the main target and not T.Y. Danjuma, and not Aguiyi Ironsi. But I want to correct him that the main target has always, or had always been, Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi. He was a target from the beginning. And also at this point, I have my own views, but I'm trying not to share my views to remove the unconscious biasness. When people see you speaking on something, they assume because you're a Biafran man, it means you're trying to embellish the facts. Let us hear from a third person again exactly what happened on that day. How our leader, Aguiyi Ironsi, was killed on that day. Listen.
By way of background on Danjuma, is quite historical, and I commend him. One thing maybe he forgot or he may not know if he's listening is that Ironsi was not killed just by taking him out of government house. I mean, the government house at, Fajui's, Adekunle, Francis Adekunle Fajui's residence on 29th July. And maybe somewhere around is Mokola or somewhere around there, outside the Ibadan, he was shot. He wasn't just killed that way. Probably Fajui must have been shot because he resisted. He doesn't want to give off of Ironsi. He wants to protect his commander-in-chief. The way Ironsi was killed is not torture. It was too cheap. You tie one leg here, you tie one leg, then tell the driver to drive in opposite way. Then the man, just like the way you tear chicken, that was how Ironsi was killed. That was how Ironsi was killed. I'm quoting you. You can quote me. So it's not a case of holding Ironsi, tie him behind and shot him. No. Hold one leg here, one leg tied to the other jeep, military jeep, and then tell the driver, keep going this way, keep going on your masthead, go. Then they move. Ironsi was torn to shreds. So Danjuma did this to satisfy the caliphate, and he was handsomely rewarded because his oil wells, his number of oil wells is the biggest. He has the highest number of oil wells, if not number one or number two in Nigeria. I remember one time I read he gave how many million naira to Ahmadu Bello University, just like he want to give to them. He has so many business interests. Now, when they did all this, it was to satisfy the Fulani, and he was handsomely rewarded. Then, one Nigeria was good. Then he joined in slaughtering Biafrans. But one thing people do not know is this. He should have asked himself, why is he still alive up till this moment? Why? Now his village is being decimated. The Jukun people, the Fulanis are decimating them. He's being decimated. So now he's crying. We knew all this. You see, that is the issue. That is the hypocrisy of the country. Now, what is he rallying us for? Like somebody observed during the graduation ceremony at the Taraba State University. I think they gave him honorary doctorate degree. He was there talking. The language he used was, the military, they collude. They collude. They collude. This was his language. It's quite fresh. So what is he telling us to do? That the Fulanis are colluding with the Boko, the whatever, and slaughtering people.
There you have it, my fellow Biafrans and people all over the world. There you have it. The same man who today he's shouting, they collude, they collude. The military, they collude. And some of you, the gullible ones, because you don't know your history. The Fulani Cabal and the Caliphate, they deliberately took history out of the institutions in that zoo called Nigeria. Some of you were clapping hands, appreciating what T.Y. Danjuma was saying just last year, I believe, where he was screaming out of his lungs, from the top of his lungs, that they collude, they collude. The military, they collude to do what they are doing now. He never saw the handwriting on the wall that what Chukwuemeka, Kaduna, Nziogu and their so-called coup in January 15th, 1966, what they saw back then is still happening now. They saw it back then, but Danjuma was so busy trying to please the caliphate. The same way Afonja was trying to please the caliphate, that he sold out his people in Ilorin. The same storyline. This keeps repeating itself over and over and over again. The same storyline keeps on repeating itself over and over and over again. They do things to please the bully. Those who are responsible for the ills of that zoo called Nigeria, they always go scot-free. When people step up as men to solve the problem, when they rise up or rose as men in 1966 to say enough of that nonsense happening in that zoo called Nigeria, people like T.Y. Danjuma, they rose up to please the caliphate, and they did what they did. Ironsi was killed like a helpless chicken. It was videoed as well. From what I'm hearing, the mother of Agui Ironsi was videoed. My father told me then, back then, we had the history, we had the journals, eyewitness account, people that were sitting from a far away distance in buildings, they saw what happened in that field. They saw what happened. How 2 of the military trucks, they tied him leg to leg. He was pleading with T.Y. Danjuma. Say, young man, what are you doing? What have I done? Give me time to sort this thing out. Give me the time to sort this thing out. He was being accused that, he has spared people like those that, caused the coup in January 15th, 1966. But he said, look, they are still in custody. Give me time to sort things out. What have I done to you? Why are you doing me this? T.Y. Danjuma had no race in that fight. He had no dog in that fight. He did what he did to please the caliphate. And this same man is still alive, going from town to town, village to village, checking the oil wells given to him as a reward by the Fulani Caliphate. You killed a man who is from a tribe where they own the oil, but you are out there now enjoying the dividends of the oil coming from the land of Johnson and Agui Ironsi. This man called T.Y. Danjuma, he as well, plus Gowon, must live long and until Biafra comes this year. Because not only did he do what he did, he was also part and parcel of those who went out to fight the Biafrans, to slaughter the Biafrans during the Biafran War. Less than a year later, there was a Biafran War. And T.Y. Danjuma and the rest of them, they went back with their uniforms to please the caliphate. And they did what they did. So for all you who are saying, oh, T.Y. Danjuma, he's speaking well, oh, he's speaking through the power. He's shouting that the military, they collude, the cabal, they collude. Now he's crying because the chicken has come home to roost. Those he was trying to please in 1966, suddenly now they are headsmen, they are Boko Haram, they have come to his village, they are pillaging his village, and they are taking over his village in Taraba, I believe. The old Gongola state. The same story. When you look at Afonja, the same script is still being played till this day, which is why we are calling on Tinubu, wash your hands off the case of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. If you know what is good for you, because we have seen the blueprint, we the scholars, we know the games of the caliphate. I felt so bad. I was doing my research and I got to the point where I said, wow, this same T.Y. Danjuma is now a multi-billionaire based on the oil well gotten from the land of Biafra. It was given to him. He was handsomely rewarded by the Fulani Caliphate for doing their job. This same man called T.Y. Danjuma. My fellow Biafrans, it won't be fair for me to end it this way without putting a closure to it. I want to run this one home to the family of General Johnson Agui Ironsi to hear from his son, a young boy who I believe then he was schooling abroad and he was on holiday with his father. He went on that same trip with his father. He was in that house that his father met his demise. He was in the same house with his father when T.Y. Danjuma came on a suicide mission. Do you know that T.Y. Danjuma came with a live grenade? That was a suicide bomber. He was a terrorist. He came as a suicide bomber. He was ready to die for the caliphate, because he came with a grenade and the pin was already out of the grenade. And he told Adekunle to say, hey, take me to your leader. Take me to General Agui Ironsi, or else I will let go this grenade and everybody in the house will die. That's it. That's the definition of a terrorist. I don't know what else you want to call him. And this man was given some positions, a defense minister or something some years back. A terrorist who came to someone's house with a live grenade, threatening to blow himself and every other person in that house. Even with the 12-year-old son of Johnson Aguiyi. My fellow Biafrans, enough is enough. If you think people out there, they are your friends because you are doing business with them, because you went to the same school with them, you work with them, you assume they are your friends, what happened to Aguiyi should be a learning moment for everybody. It should be a lesson for everyone. At this point, let us hear from the son of Aguiyi and hear from his own narrative, because he was there. He heard those voices. He heard the last words from his father. I had to dig deep to get this information. Listen to the son of Aguiyi. Then I'll come back to wrap it up. Listen.
As you just mentioned, I was 12 years old during that period. But if I look back at the events of 29th July, actually I'd come in from the summer holidays.
You were in boarding school in England, of course.
I'd come in from summer holidays. The day itself, I was with my father in his drawing room in the guest house, and he jokingly told me that there are soldiers surrounding us downstairs.
And that was the guest house in Ibadan.
That's right.
In the military governor of the western region, Fajuyi, that was his house.
That was his house. So he told me that he doesn't know whether they're friendly or not, in a joking manner. And then later proceeded to give me some instructions as to what to do when I got back to Lagos. And then there was a knock at the door, and he told me to stand behind the door because he didn't want anybody to come inside. And from the door, I could hear voices and people saying there's going to be no killing here. And that was the end.
Discuss that, because your take on that, given the pivotal role that you and your family have played in the evolution of politics in this country, is absolutely crucial. But I just want to go back to that date. You were 12 years old. You've shared some of your memories with us, but just, did your father have any premonition that that was going to be his last day on earth? Did he seem frightened when he was giving you those instructions?
I really don't want to go into too many details.
Right.
Because some of the people who are alive, who can speak better on such matters. But from my perspective, as I said, I was on summer holidays. I came back and he took me on a tour. We went to the north, we went to Benin before we came to Ibadan. As a student of strategic studies, politics, international relations, I've read, I've also done my research. I realized that part of his tour was consultations with the elders in the north, and he had come down to the west to consult with elders in the west. Because, as you mentioned before, there was a lot of distrust that this was an Igbo agenda. And the Northerners insisted that he should consult with them. The Saldana was killed. It brought about much bad blood. The Emir of Sokoto came down to see him, and they said, you must consult with us. He failed to do that initially, and by the time I came on holiday, he was in the process of trying to make up for that.
So they needed reassurances.
They needed reassurances as to what programs he was going to do, what he was going to do with the soldiers that were locked up who carried out the coup.
And that was part of the anger, wasn't it? That in spite of the fact that he put down that coup, he didn't actually do anything with these soldiers who were essentially, who essentially murdered Nigeria's political elite.
That was it. He was too slow. Nowadays, when people are slow, they say it's a virtue. But at that time, they didn't want things to be slow. He was taking his time. There was also the case of Awolowo. Some people would tell you that he was just about to be released by my father. But these things are, as I said, in the past. We need to look forward.
But it was really just because the second part of this will look forward, but just to go back to that January 15th, it was the brutality of that coup that really freaked people out, wasn't it? I mean, groups of army officers forming themselves into hit squads to hunt down Nigeria's civilian and military leaders while they slept.
It's terrible. The periods of coup, not only in Nigeria, but in other African countries, were bloody. It's a sad fact. It's a very sad fact. And in fact, the Queen too, when I was presented to her at the Commonwealth Conference in Canada in the 80s, she said it's such a pity that Africa has lost so many good people.
Looking back at that period and what could be considered the heavy reaction of the army to what by today's standards would be mild corruption, let me put it that way. I mean, how does it make you feel today when you see people who, for want of a better term, can be called criminal politicians getting away with corruption?
Yes, if you want to talk about the Nigerian military, if we go back to the 60s, we find a cohesive group, people who were their brother's keepers.
Right.
My father, his best friend was General Adebayo, a Yoruba man. Uncle Jack, as I call him, General Gowon, was a regular visitor to the family. Now, over the years, you saw a situation where coups developed. You find it very difficult for officers to go to the mess nowadays to even interact with one another. So things have changed in the military.
Right. So things have changed in the military. So things have changed in the military. So things have changed in the military. My fellow Biafrans, that's the buzzword to take along with you in this video. If there is nothing else you can learn or take with you from this, my presentation, things have changed in the military. Back then, they were doing it for prestige, for respect. They said, you must respect my region. Do what you want to do, but respect us here. Down here, we need respect. Those are gone now. What you have now is tribalism, nepotism. They blame the Biafran for everything. They even blame Ojukwu for everything. Despite Ojukwu went all the way to ABURI out of respect for Gowon. Somebody he called a friend. Someone he has assumed was a real friend. Not knowing that these guys, they were just playing to impress the caliphate. The same way T.Y. Danjuma was doing what he did to impress the caliphate. That same way did Gowon do all what he did to the Biafrans. He killed 7 million Biafrans. He starved us of Kwashoko. Our children, more than 7 million, starved and infected with Kwashoko, all just to please the caliphate. When you look at it very, very well, they were all rewarded handsomely. T.Y. Danjuma now is a multi-billionaire with oil wells from the land of Biafra. Go on till this day, he was rewarded. In fact, he was loved by the caliphate. was loved by the caliphate. Mind you, these were not Muslims. Gowon is not a Muslim. T.Y. Danjuma is not a Muslim. But you saw the role they play. You saw the roles they played to please the caliphate. So when we tell you that when this thing we are doing, this thing called Biafra that we are doing, you need to respect us. Don't be saying, oh, your pastor talks, say your pastor is this, your pastor is that. We have told you that 70% of the so-called Protestant pastors, they were Muslims. The caliphate, they knew the game was up. They knew something would come out. So in order to keep you docile, they sent Muslims to become Christian pastors. Way back in the 70s and the early 80s. Men like you see, those men you see, the so-called Redeemed Church, Latter Day Assembly, Citadel, Pastor Tunde Bakare and the rest of them, they were all hardcore Muslims that turned, or they claim they converted to Christians. Most of your pastors, they were Muslims. Oyedekma was a Muslim. All of them were Muslims. They are playing the same role T.Y. Danjuma and Gowon is playing till this day. To keep you docile. They preach to you prosperity. They preach to you prosperity. They tell you your reward is in heaven. But the real men of God like Mazen Nnamdi Kanu, the real men of God like Ojukwu, who saw what was coming and they went all out, they told us what was about to happen, you are here castigating them. You hate on those who are here to give you your liberation. You hate on Simon Ekpa, the disciple of Mazen Nnamdi Kanu. Those who are the real prophets, you hate on them. You want to kill them. I've just told you, in ABURI Accord, there were different agreements laid on the table, and everything was signed and sealed in ABURI. Towards the end, they drank wine together. They ate from the same plate. Ojukwu and Gowon, they ate from the same plate together. They shook hands as men. All the stakeholders were happy, they were jubilant, they believed they have averted the war in the so-called giant of Africa, something that was inevitable. With the agreement, they felt everything was done and dusted. Unknown to Ojukwu that the person he said he had an agreement with was a stooge to the caliphate. The only segment of that agreement that was fulfilled was for the fact that Gowon allowed the family of Agoyin to exhume his body from Ibadan. Can you imagine that being part of the agreement of the ABURI Accord? Think deep, my people. They buried you somewhere and they said you cannot exhume the body and bury him in the southeast until there was an ABURI Accord. And part of the items there, part of the agreement was to allow Ojukwu and Agoyin wife to exhume the body of their loved one. And they gave him a befitting state burial. I want you to watch this video next. You will see the plane coming down. And you will see the wife of Agoyin and Ojukwu. Watch this video before I wrap it up. Listen. That's the widow of General Johnson Agoyin, welcoming the body of her late husband, murdered, brutally murdered. The exhumed body came from Ibadan down to Enugu. That's what you're seeing here. People were watching, and that was the new home, the new burial ground of General Johnson Agoyin. There you have it, my fellow Biafrans. People all around the world, there you have it. At this point, I need us to focus on what we are doing now. That was then, this is now. The same enemies we had back then, we still have them now. The same politics they were playing back then, they are playing it now. My fellow Biafrans, at this point, this is why we are saying enough is enough. We are sick and tired of being sick and tired. We are done with that entity, that contraption called Nigeria. We the Biafrans, we the children of God, we the black Jews on this earth called the world. We are saying we are done with anything called Nigeria. We are going back home. We are going to work to restore Biafra. We are going back to our rightful home, our real nation, the nation given to us by God, not a nation that was created by a white man, with all due respect. I am a black man. I am first on this earth. I refuse to accept any name given to us by a white man. Those who want to continue with the name called Nigeria, good on you. Farewell. We are saying for we the Biafrans, the 80 million Biafrans, we are reclaiming what we were before the coming of your so-called colonial masters, your slave masters, those who saw you as lesser than a human. They named you what you are today. They named you Nigeria, a prostitute, the concubine of Lord Lugard, a woman known as Flora Shaw. Over time, she now claimed she was a journalist to have the opportunity to visit Africa over and over again.
And by that only no consciousness or any name. Niwapo. Edeke isowe gaya bife inoria the ballon the gentle lion who was in Iroquois. No basinke tata no. Ozo the kibiabo. Kefi were ikuba stomach ya bife ndani no who was in Iroquois. Folk would didn't open the cosi the kefi or the kikuba stomach ya bife. Drop wire on the comment section below. Chitapedi Eastern News 24 kaisi wene wotero no pozi ya dokemba. Dano no mundem gwan kemesian.